Hey, everybody. Before we get started, I want to thank my friends at Hatch for producing this episode. You can get unlimited podcast editing and strategy for one flat rate by visiting hatch.fm. All right, let's get into the show. Welcome to Distribution First, the show where we flip content marketing on its head and focus on what happens after you hit publish. Each week, I share playbooks, motivations, stories, and strategies to help you repurpose and distribute your content because you deserve to get the most out of everything you create. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Distribution First. Fun one for you today. A little bit different, but I love doing these episodes. I have Josh Chronister with me today, and he is all things product marketing, content, and copy at a company called AudioCodes. And we are going to do a deep dive coaching session. I've invited Josh to come on and just basically share with me what he has going on and basically be able to give him as much help as I possibly can and allow you all to listen in as well. So Josh, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here, man.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Happy to be here. Yeah, I will take all the help that I can get. I know your show is distribution first, but a lot of times I feel like I take the opposite approach of distribution last, thinking of it from the opposite perspective. And yeah, I'm here to learn. Happy to be here. I know it's past Halloween season, but this is scary season for B2B marketers, Q4, trying to finish the year strong and make sure that we're good to go for Q1 25 planning. So the perfect time for this. So yeah, really excited to be here and look forward to hearing what you can coach me on. Could use it. So
absolutely, man. Yeah, spooky season indeed. Wrapping up Q4 into Q1 and all of the sort of dual personalities that you have to contain in that, where you're trying to both prep and wrap up and have a strong end to the year, and also at the same time plan for what hopefully would be an exciting beginning in Q1. So
yes,
yeah, where we can start is maybe just give me and give the listener a little bit of a background as to your company, what you're working on, kind of what you're managing, and then we can dive into the specifics.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work in product marketing for a company called AudioCodes, traditionally in the telecom space, kind of doing a lot of the back end stuff related to like SBCs and really the technical things when it comes to voice and video in the workplace. I specifically work for a contact center software that we have there called Voca. We sell into organizations who are using Microsoft Teams and would like to have their contact center integrated with Microsoft Teams. Yeah, so sole product marketer for that specific software and business line, but really handling a lot of other things like content creation. We have a podcast, any type of content creation, really, blogs, webinars, social media. And then also the copy side of things. A lot of that falls into product marketing as well, but a lot of the positioning and website copy, emails, and any other type of sales enablement too, to help the sales team make sure they have everything they need to be able to close the deal. So I wear a couple different hats, but really I see that as really an advantage, from the product marketing side, being able to understand the market and have a lot of conversations with customers and with the product team, and then being able to turn that into content that I know is relevant for our audience. So it's a lot of hats. It's busy. Got a couple things we can talk through as far as the content that we're creating, but it's all good. So I enjoy it.
Yeah, love that. And I think that was one thing I learned maybe most of all, both working and certainly when I ran my own thing, is the kind of the closer, obviously, right? The closer you get to the customer, the more you get, the closer to the product, the less you let other teams and other people within the org sort of handle those things, the better your content is. So That's super cool. But yeah, let's dive into it. So you're running content. What do you got? What are your biggest questions? How can I help you out?
Yeah, well, we got a couple things going on. Like, I feel like almost every other B2B software company, we have a video-based podcast that we run. Shout out Scrappy ABM, Mason Cosby, helping us with that podcast. So that's kind of the main content engine that we have, and we repurpose a lot from there. But there's a couple other things. We have product release notes. That's obviously more of a core product marketing activity, but something that we're releasing pretty often, hand in hand with the product team. So video podcasts, product release notes, webinars on occasion. And that was something I kind of wanted to talk to you about a little bit more. We wanted to add, I know in 25, a little bit more consistency from that because we have a free trial. We see a lot of conversions when we have webinars, especially because we sell into a very technical audience. The audience likes to see the product and kind of get hands-on with it. Sponsored articles within industry journals, that's more prevalent in the UK and EMEA market. And then also some of that, again, more core product marketing things like sales enablement, battle cards, PowerPoints, one-pagers, talk tracks. And then here and there, the occasional ebook guide. We don't do too many of those. Maybe we'll have one come out per year, but from there, we do distribute it pretty heavily. But whether I'm doing it the best way possible, I don't know.
For sure. Yeah, dude, that's awesome. I think one of the things that I learned when I was on sort of solo marketer number one content, certainly solo content marketer, is you have to make the most out of everything that you've got. And then like the consistency at which you can do that can quickly either become a benefit or a hindrance. So like you mentioned, like the webinars, if you can get those running, that's something you should be doing, but
yeah,
it's also a bit of a lift there to be able to do that.
Big
but
lift.
I think the more that you can figure out sort of how all of those things coexist together, one of the things that I work with a lot of people on is understanding where each particular thing that you're trying to do fits in with that journey.
Yeah.
So you're not overwhelming any one part of a buyer's journey because you've only got so much bandwidth and so many things that you're able to create. So
yes.
How I might look at it if I was in your case is, all right, we've got podcast. Where do you think podcast fits into like buyer's journey? What are maybe some of the topics and things that you guys are creating?
Yeah. So it's definitely pretty top of funnel. We have a mix of how we handle the episodes. Really, we've been going strong for 2024 as far as consistency and everything. We started out by having our just internal experts on calls and talking about more of those like top of funnel questions. What is a Microsoft Teams contact center? How to create a great conversational IVR or interactive voice response, very specific to the contact center. And we found those types of topics do really well. And when I say do really well, I mean when I'm looking at the engagement of the long form video on YouTube, because that's our main distribution channel. So the topics really stick a lot to top of funnel within the podcast episodes. And now we're branching out a little bit more to have some external guests on to maybe dive a little bit deeper into what's going on in the market. What are the changes that we've seen in the market? Kind of have a little bit of some experts on to talk about what they know and what they're experiencing based off of conversations they have. So I would say very top of funnel. We're not, one thing when I play host of the podcast, it's fun. Also, another cheat code if you're in product marketing, be the host for your company podcast because it teaches you a lot about the customer and the market.
Where my head goes is, all right, cool. We've got this podcast that's driving a ton of top of funnel. What are you currently I mean, you tease that you're putting on YouTube. What else are you doing with that podcast or, that Mason's helping you with or whatever you guys are working on? But after you hit publish on this podcast, what else gets done? What else gets created off of it?
Yeah. So I mentioned we have the podcast. It mainly gets distributed from a long form video on YouTube. And then from there, we do the typical thing of breaking it into snippets for social. So those snippets get placed on LinkedIn for the most part. That's where a majority of our audience lives, is on LinkedIn. And we do cross promote also on Facebook. Not a whole lot of engagement there. And then on X, Twitter X, whatever you want to call it these days. But those are the main distribution channels for the snippets. And then the audio format for the long form episode also goes on Spotify and Apple. We're not seeing a ton of engagement there. It's mostly on YouTube for the long form content. Yeah.
I actually kind of love that because I think that's one of the things I saw somebody posting on LinkedIn yesterday, actually, and they were asking, hey, content marketers, like, where's the investments you want to make? And it was like YouTube, this, I can't remember all of them, but YouTube, I was like, oh, YouTube, I think for sure. Yeah. And that was by far the vast majority of where people are looking to make that investment. And I think there's a lot of people that I work with who are moving into the, a lot of people have done podcasts, but I don't think they necessarily are doing them correctly. I'm super interested at the idea that you're actually seeing more traction on YouTube than you are on like Spotify or Apple.
Yeah.
My guess would be that's coming from search.
In some ways, yes. We do a distribution email whenever we release an episode. And we have
Okay.
the 3 call to actions in there for, watch on YouTube, listen on Spotify, listen on Apple Music. We did, play around with the placement of where those call to actions are in the email. The most prominent one is the YouTube one. The reason we chose that one was because, well, YouTube is free. Spotify, you have to, if you want to have the good version of Spotify and not be listening to commercials all the time, you'll have to pay for it. But YouTube in general, you can have premium, obviously, but it's free and accessible. And in search, it's going to show up a lot more as well. And since it's a video-based podcast as well, we found that was going to be making the most sense as far as where to distribute it. And I would say the rest of our company, we have a pretty good presence on YouTube as well. So, and the AudioCodes brand name, as far as within the industry of the specific, IT vertical that we sell into, is relatively known. So that helps piggyback off of it too.
Yeah, cool. You've got, I'm looking at it right now. It's not going to help anybody listen to this show, but I'm checking out your YouTube channel right now. It seems like you guys are doing pretty good and you're consistent. I think one of the cool things too, just for folks to realize, if you are thinking about doing YouTube, is even though the numbers are not massive from a YouTube perspective, I'm putting air quotes in here as you compared to like Mr. Beast or anything like that, but like
no, we're close.
A B2B podcast that's 20 to 30 minutes, that's getting anywhere from, I'm just looking at the AudioCodes channel, anywhere from 200 and change to 300 and change views on these things. Like, those are pretty decent numbers for somebody sitting down and watching a long form YouTube video. Now, again, you'll know more about their retention and all those things. But,
yeah,
when you start to stack that on top of the plays you're getting on social, on top of the plays that you're getting on the individual podcast platforms, it does actually make an impact. And you are going to probably get different audience on YouTube than you will in the podcast feed, which always blows my mind, because you're like, it's the same content. Like, wouldn't people be? And I think just the more that I've studied it and the more I've even thought about as I try to bring this show to YouTube and do different things on YouTube in the upcoming year, just the understanding that there's a totally different person who's going to watch a YouTube podcast than who's going to listen to it, even if the content's the exact same.
Yeah. One of the reasons also we focused on YouTube from a distribution channel is we looked at our competitors, and there is little to no presence there as far as this type of show or type of video on YouTube. And we thought it was there for the taking because it wasn't really competing with anyone else. And yeah, the show specifically Always on CXEX, we tried to get it to be very targeted as well as the type of person that we're speaking to. And yeah, like you said, we have some of those episodes 200. We have an episode with 1,300 views. It ranges usually around 400 or 500 views. And it was a surprise to me too, because I was like, hey, we might as well try. And we're happy with the numbers too. And also, like you said, if you're looking at the views on the short clips on LinkedIn as well, you might know a little bit more about this too. You see like the hours watched of the video. And on most videos, we see anywhere between, I guess, minutes wise, between like 200 and 300 minutes per video. And these videos can range from a minute to 2 minutes in length. I don't know how accurate that is. Maybe you know a little bit more about it, but those have been like the main repurposing efforts that we've done. And like I said, we work with Scrappy ABM. They've helped us a lot in being able to find the right clips, the right message, because that can take a lot of time to be able to repurpose the content. I know that's a lot of what you help people with, but
yes, it is.
It's very time consuming. And then I did have a question around that. I found that I struggle a lot with being able to sit down and write the captions for those specific videos. And I kind of go back and forth, like, should I let the video just speak for itself? We have the captions on it. Should I let the video just speak for itself and that be the main content and have a short caption? Or should I really sit down and write more of a long form caption on a video? Maybe you have some ideas there.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And we're talking LinkedIn specifically?
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe the subtle difference. Like if you did a short or something on YouTube, it would be far less like the title would actually be the most important thing.
Mhm.
Whereas I think on LinkedIn, even though LinkedIn is moving toward that sort of like video panel in the app, some people have access to it, some people don't. They want to sort of like build up that shorts or reels feature within LinkedIn. I think still written content drives a lot of what goes around on LinkedIn.
Okay.
And you could still get a lot of traction by writing a dedicated post for that content. I have found just even in my habits, if I'm scrolling through my feed, I might skim through the main points of your post rather than watch the video, even
Okay.
if the video is interesting.
Yeah.
And just because maybe I don't have my sound on, or maybe I'm just like, I'm busy and I'm just in skimming mode. So I think it really can't hurt to do that. And I think in some instances, like with the LinkedIn's algorithm, the more that you get people to number one, stop. So again, creating a really interesting hook that pairs with the video
Mm.
is crucial. So you're going to get somebody to stop to pay attention. They're either going to play the video or they're going to click see more.
Yep.
And so that dwell time of like how long is your content on that screen is just a signal to LinkedIn, to the algorithm that, hey, this is interesting. So I think the more that you can put there as far as context, the better. And then I have found too, like when you're talking about long-term repurposing and other things like that, like if you spent the time to write that post that's not maybe massive, but substantial enough to where you're getting your ideas around it, and that post takes off, now you've got a baseline to build other things. You have a baseline to build an email that you could send on that same topic. You have a baseline
Yeah.
to write a blog post on that same topic. So that's where I found the benefit of creating more substantial written content on LinkedIn, because then if something does take off, I can use that as a feedback loop and say, oh, this topic was awesome, cool. Oop, now I'm going to use that as my starter point.
Yeah. So that's kind of using a social video or a clip or whatever as the leading indicator for something that resonated with the audience, and then expand
Yep.
and repurposing that into other channels or formats. Okay. That's a good
Yeah,
idea.
and I would think about like, yeah, how do you repurpose that up? Or, so that's sort of when I talk about building a distribution flywheel, that's a huge part of it, is that validation loop of like, you've got your podcast, it loops over to social, you're getting that feedback, which is giving you more ideas, which then loops back, right? So maybe that loops back into another podcast episode that dives deeper into that topic. Maybe it's just something as small as it drills into another LinkedIn post that's just text based, that you're like, oh, cool, I'll just write a text based post about this. Or maybe it fuels your webinar strategy for a webinar that you want to bring somebody on who's an expert in that area to talk about and dive into deeper. So really, it's just about kind of being a constantly in the mode of looking for what's resonating. And you have the benefit. It's the burden of being the one all be all, but it's also a benefit because your hands are constantly in it, and you're talking to the customers. You're kind of in social. You're understanding what's working. It's a lot, but then it can really fuel the things that you're working on.
Yeah. Well, I do want to say, we have a wonderful marketing communications team that they're in charge of the social media and the website and the emails, and they really dive a lot into the data. So also being able to collaborate with them of what they're seeing, what they're seeing is performing really well, and a paid media team too that works in being able to see what content is resonating. You spoke a little bit about seeing what podcast episodes are performing well and then turning that maybe into a webinar. What about from like a speaking slot too? As far as, our company is pretty heavy in events. And a lot of times we have someone at the events, as a keynote speaker or a paid speaker to be on stage. And then we have a booth, obviously, where we send people to have more further conversations. One of the things we actually repurpose, and the speaking slot is coming up here in a couple of weeks, is, we saw one podcast episode that performed really well. It's just like the 5 questions you should ask when you're evaluating, and then our category keyword. And it performed well, and we're turning that into a speaking slot with slides and everything at a upcoming show. What are your thoughts on then, if it resonates well based off of feedback that I hear, then turning that into like a webinar?
Oh yeah, I think like in my mind, it's that type of thing where if that podcast takes off, I'm like, sweet, I could create a whole campaign around this idea for the next month and a half, right? Or depending on what we want to do. It's like, I know this topic resonates. It's also going to be here. We're going to create a standalone LinkedIn carousel slider that hits on all 5 questions. We're going to create a webinar that speaks to it. You could tease out that social content of each idea and say, and that could be promo into your webinar and say, hey, we're going to do it. If found this interesting, we're going to dive into all 5 topics. So really just pulling at that thread, because I think the more that you can get comfortable repeating those ideas and get comfortable that understanding like our audience loves this content, I'll give them more of what they love, even if they've heard it once. Like the things that like the frameworks and the things that from my favorite companies and creators, like the more they say them, the more they drill into my head, the more that I'm like, oh yeah, I am on the right path. I am doing the right things. These are the right questions I should be asking myself. But a lot of companies fall short of that because they think we got to create something novel or new. And I think for you, especially as you're thinking about like, man, how can I get the most out of not only the content, but the ideas? And that's what I talk a lot about too with folks, is this idea of like being able to not only micro repurpose this podcast to clips, but be able to macro repurpose your ideas and your core messages that AudioCodes can become known for. So like, people start to resonate AudioCodes with these 5 questions. That's what you're really looking for.
Yep. Okay, cool. I love it.
Can I ask you a question real quick? I'll flip it on you. I'm curious. I get questions all the time about measurement. I get questions all the time about what to look at. What do you all look at? And again, what I tell people is really, there's no like perfect answer for this. Everybody has different channels. Everybody's using different distribution. Everybody has different types of content. But what are you all looking at as you're trying to figure out what makes your successful content distribution as you're working with your social media team, looking at YouTube? What are the things that you all are diving into?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one thing we haven't talked about yet, and something I've been toying with the past 6 months, and we've kind of been playing with it. Also, collaboration with Scrappy ABM is LinkedIn newsletter. So one way that we also, we have the podcast. We know that looking at Spotify and Apple results aren't really telling us the indicator of how it's performing. We're looking more so at when we distribute it. So we distribute through an email distribution to our own audience that we have at AudioCodes. And we're looking at, hey, based off the title and what's the click-through rate looking like? Are people actually going to the YouTube video? And then from there, we're going and looking at YouTube. What are the views? What are the length of time that people are spending in watching the YouTube video? We also look at the shares. That's important for us. So that's one of the main metrics I look at. Are people sharing this video? Because, if you and I are watching YouTube videos, you're not going to see this many people shared it. You can see how many people liked it. You used to be able to see how many people disliked, I think, but that's not a thing anymore. But we look at the shares. Are people, sharing it within their network? Are they sharing it within teams via emails? I'm not able to see that specific amount of detail, but I can see if they're clicking that share button. That's important for us too, because it shows that it resonates.
And that's within YouTube?
Within YouTube
the
metrics.
Share button isn't with YouTube. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also, I know we talked about this a little bit too. When I'm looking at more of the shorter clips that we're posting on LinkedIn, I'm looking at things like impressions, yes, but I'm also looking at the amount of time the video has been watched. So when I see it's been watched for 500 minutes, that's something I'm going to share with that other person that we were interviewing. I'm going to share with that amongst our team. So like, hey, there's a lot of value in this video. Let's think through how we might be able to turn it into a blog. That's one thing that we're repurposing. And then lastly, like I kind of started with, is the LinkedIn newsletters. So we've been finding actually a lot of value and engagement on the LinkedIn newsletters. I don't know what it is with LinkedIn, but they love when you're posting newsletters, and they, it really helps with the reach actually. And you're also tapping into your existing audience that you have for your company page. So AudioCodes specifically, we had about 32,000 or something like that followers of our company page. When you launch the LinkedIn newsletter, it automatically distributes a notification to all the followers that there's been a new newsletter launched by AudioCodes. So we've been doing it for about 6 months. I think we have around 7,000, a little over 7,000 subscribers to the newsletter. And what I do is in our podcast episodes, we typically have, we have someone on and we interview them. We ask them, 5 to 7 questions and to get their insight on something or how whatever is being built or how to build something and helpful for a contact center manager or IT manager who oversees the contact center. But what we do is I take those questions, put that into the LinkedIn newsletter, and then do a bulleted answer of how that question was answered. And it ends up being about, I don't know, anywhere between 500 and 700 words. In each question, I take the specific part or link from YouTube. So in YouTube, you can, when you click the share button, there's a checkbox that says share at 11 minutes and 52 seconds. So you take that specific link and I pop it into where that answer is being talked about in the newsletter. So when someone clicks, I want to watch this on YouTube, it takes them specifically to that portion of the video. The very bottom, after answering all those things or all those questions, we embed the YouTube video on the LinkedIn newsletter. And then at the very bottom, we just do a little shout out about Voca. You can, if you're interested in, having a Microsoft Teams contact center, you can start a free trial for 30 days, test it out, see it, how you like it. Every time that we post that LinkedIn newsletter, we're getting between 15 to 20 people starting a free trial. On average, we're normally getting around 50 people start a free trial per month. But that LinkedIn newsletter we've seen the last couple of months, especially driving traffic to the sign up page. And I really stumbled upon this date. I can't say, hey, I was looking for this indicator from the very beginning. I really just stumbled upon that data in the past month or two of like, oh, wow, there's a big spike in traffic to our product page on this specific date. And that's been happening the past couple months. And I go back, like, all right, what was the date that we publish the LinkedIn newsletter? I'm like, oh, wait a second. That correlates. I can't give specific of like, oh, we have the tag link and specifically attribute it directly to the LinkedIn newsletter, things like that.
But there's correlation there, right?
There's correlation there. So that's how we're really tracking the success of this content from the podcast and the distribution of it.
Well, yeah, man, I actually think you guys are doing a great job at distribution. It was funny. I wasn't quite sure when you messaged me like, hey, man, I need some help on this. But I think you guys are killing it. Like, as I look through and think about like a distribution first framework and building out your flywheel, like you've done that around your podcast. You have it may not be as tight as you want it to be, but you've got a good flywheel from your YouTube channel to your newsletters to your social content. You're doing a good job of spreading that out. So as we think about, and I don't know, are you familiar with the distribution first framework at all? Like how the 4 phases?
I remember listening to it yesterday when you were talking through it. And here I am. Forgetting them.
And again, this is like a meta version of why you repeat yourself over and over again. So the 4 phases are really about building your foundation, starting to execute on that, and then optimizing and maximizing. So what you've done, you've built a foundation. You have, I would say, you know who your audience is, you know your core messages, you know who you're trying to talk to. You have that super niche that you've owned and started to create content for. You've built out your initial flywheel. You have your repurposing flywheel going for this podcast. You put it on YouTube. You have a standard that you're going for. You're even in some ways probably starting to optimize that. And that's maybe the pain that you're feeling a little bit is the optimization of that. And how do you either get more out of the podcast or, as you're diving into the data around the newsletter, like, whoa, when we send these newsletters, we're getting, signups. So in my brain, how I think about the optimization phase is, okay, can we do more newsletters or like at a higher volume potentially? I don't know. I don't think you said, what's your cadence on those? Is it
so we release them
weekly or bi-weekly?
We release them bi-weekly on LinkedIn. But one of the things I wanted to talk about, and maybe you might be getting into this, is also simultaneously having it more in our owned audience. So right now we send out the distribution of the podcast episode to our own list, but
Mm-hmm.
wanting to think of, can we repurpose that more and have it be more of a newsletter where there's a little bit more information in there too? So say
Mm-hmm.
we have the blog, or we have I don't know if it's worth calling out a specific short clip from LinkedIn that's like telling our audience, like, hey, this one's performed really well. Maybe, or, we're not saying it's performed really well because only we care about that, but we notice that our audience resonates a lot with this message. Check it out, type of thing. And also as a place to, I know I talked about webinars earlier and wanting to be a little bit more consistent with that, but having that be as a place where we can distribute the webinar and also get people to try to sign up for it. So is that falling more into that
Yeah.
optimization side of thing too?
I think so, because that's where you're going to start. I would say those are things you're going to have to test, because you won't know how your audience responds until you do a couple of them, right?
Yeah.
So like you can sit here and sort of think like, well, should we send? Personally, I think the more that you can, it's more about the message, and then the distribution channel, whether it's email, LinkedIn newsletter, whatever, that's just the medium that you're sending the message. And so you've really sort of cracked a little bit of a code with your LinkedIn newsletter where you're pointing directly to things that might be interesting to that. You're giving them the summary so they can skim it. So if you imagine somebody getting that, and I'm not sure what your initial emails that you're sending around your podcast look like now, but it could be very, very similar to the one you're putting out on the newsletter, where it's, these are the specific high touch points that we talked about and the things you need to know. If you want to learn about that, you can dive in and learn more. And what that's doing is you're now allowing the audience to choose what they want to listen to versus, oh, hey, we launched our brand new podcast. It's about X, Y, and Z topic. Go check it out.
Yeah, that's kind of how it falls into now.
Yeah, and I do a lot of that too. But I think you've sort of, what I love about the newsletter and YouTube side that you're showing, and it's actually something that I'm going to try out and I'm going to pencil down here, is the fact that you can link directly on YouTube to specific points in the episode is sort of a hack, because you can create one piece of content and link directly to that time code versus, I don't know if you can do that in Spotify. I don't know if you can do that in Apple. Maybe you can and I'm missing out on it, but I think that's a huge benefit of being able to do that.
Yeah. I haven't noticed being able to do that on Spotify or Apple, but I'll be honest, I don't spend nearly as much time looking at our own content on those channels as I do on YouTube.
And I think you're probably fine for that based on where you're, because one of the things I also talk about is like your core channels, and it's like YouTube is your core channel. So like that's where you're tracking growth there and understanding that's where you're putting your effort in. And so I think that's smart. But yeah, where you're at now as far as optimizing, now you're tightening up the ship. You're trying to like understand how to make it better. And then that bleeds right into that final step, which is maximization. So now you're like,
okay,
cool. Do I add more channels? Do I add more formats? How can we take, do we take that podcast episode and turn it back into a webinar series? Like that's the fun, that's that maximization piece. And the cool part is, if you're starting your webinars and you're thinking like, okay, like what do we do? Like, how do we distribute that? Like you can literally use the same playbook or an altered version of that playbook or flywheel for your webinars. It might be different to a different audience because maybe it's a more further down the funnel topic or something, or same thing with your product release notes. It's like, all right, if I know my audience is only people who have the product, like it's narrowing down your audience, but that's still like, all right, what are the ways I can get those in front of them to make sure they know what's going on, that they know, what's happening, and how do we do that?
Yeah.
That's how I would think about that.
One of the ideas I had for the release notes, and they come out very consistently. We have a pretty formal format for how we release them, but repurposing a release note into a webinar, I kind of talked about earlier, where our audience they like to be in it. They're very technical. I know there's this whole debate now, especially within product marketing, about talking about the features and like, it used to be benefits and everything, but features do really matter. It's also very specific to the type of audience that you market to. But I've found, especially when you're marketing into an IT and very technical audience, it's okay to talk about the features because they care about the features. So that kind of led to the idea of, well, if we have this product release note, which is obviously about the features and the value that they provide and the changes and updates to the product, what if we turn that into a webinar series of whenever we release a product release note that then turns into a webinar? It doesn't have to be long, maybe just 20, 30 minutes. We're talking through the product, we're going through it. Here are the updates. This is why it's valuable. This is why we made this change. This is who it's for. And just leave it kind of short and sweet like that. And just thinking through this now, I'm like, all right, I think this might be a good idea for us. But then you've talked about, optimizing that. All right, repurposing that into more shorter clips. We see a lot also, if you're on LinkedIn a lot, you see, especially within the startup space, kind of like Loom style videos of someone on camera. They're sharing the screen with the product. They're walking through a use case of the product. I feel like that could be easily repurposed from a webinar, especially if the webinar is solely focused on talking through a specific feature set. All right, Justin. So you got me here. I'm adding more stuff to my plate. Like I said, it's nightmare season. Q4 is an idea for 2025. But yeah, thanks for sharing that 4-step. That you're making me think through things here on the call. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as a teaser for you on this call, and then obviously for anybody listening after, like literally right now, I'm building out the Distribution First Academy, which is hands-on going to teach people how to do all this and be able to plot themselves in. And it's baked into the full-on part of the membership and the community, and being able to learn it all and get it all and help make everybody better. So I'm super excited about that. And I think because you're in the spot where a lot of people are at that I work with, and it's sometimes you just don't know where you're at or how am I doing all this right, or I just need that one idea to unlock and make sure like, okay, cool, I already am sort of doing a lot of these things correctly. I just don't know how to scale it, or how do I move that to the next thing I'm working on. And like for you, like my mind goes to, well, yeah, awesome. Like, and then you've got those feature sets and you can hand those over to your sales team. And now you have the same thing like you would do in your newsletter. You've got, hey, here's individual clips in the right links for every single feature set that we just released. If something comes up on a call, you can point directly to that and send that to, a prospect or a client. It just opens up a whole different world for you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I like that idea. You're bringing in the product marketing side of it too. Like, obviously, a big part of that is enabling the sales team. We got that feedback recently too, actually, of like when we do a product release of, hey, can we get a short, like, can you demo it for us as a sales team to be able to understand it better? Of like, why is it valuable? How can I speak about it? And that could be really helpful too. I mean, just from how we speak to that specific feature to the audience can also be helpful for the sales team, because then they're hearing directly from product and marketing and everyone else and the business leaders how they're communicating it to the customer. So repurposing internally is kind of what you're talking about too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge part, is especially when you're talking about like product marketing, sales enablement, all those type of things. And for me as somebody a lot of times who's, and you're probably in this case where you're responsible for a lot of those things, my mind instantly goes to, all right, if I'm doing this webinar, how can I ensure this webinar meets to the best of my ability both of those needs? So I don't have to record 2 30-minute meetings and cut 2 different things. I can record one thing, split it up in both spots, and then I have less mental drain of like trying to set up multiple calls and record all these, and like it just becomes unsustainable that way.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I know it's when we're working with an agile team and, really everyone's working hard to get the product up and going and successful, and like the main name within the category, it's you have a lack of time, but yeah, it's very helpful, like you're saying, repurposing in many different ways, both internally and externally. So yeah, thank you, Justin. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Josh, this is super fun. Yeah. Super fun. I'm glad you were able to come on and share with that. I think it's going to be super helpful. I mean, that's the best part about this for me too, is like the more folks I talk to who are running content at their companies and doing things, I learn a bunch of stuff, right? Like I think you tapping into the YouTube side is super inspiring. I think that's going to inspire a lot of people who either have podcasts who aren't doing that or are thinking about doing that in 2025. Hey, YouTube, LinkedIn, Spotify, Apple, those are all great, but YouTube's a huge untapped market too. So
Yeah, absolutely.
well, awesome, Josh. I appreciate you coming on. It was great chatting, and we'll stay in touch, dude.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Distribution First, and thank you for listening all the way through. I appreciate you so much. And I hope you're able to apply what you learned in this episode one way or another into your content strategy as well. Speaking of strategy, we have a lot of things going on this year that are going to help you build your brand, 10x your content, and transform the way you do content marketing. Make sure to subscribe to the show and sign up for my newsletter at justinsimon.co so you don't miss a thing. I look forward to serving you in the next episode as well. And until then, take care, and I'll see you next time.